Okay guys, so I have another one for you guys today. This is a Pontiac Vibe and it has a bad starter, so we're going to be replacing the starter today. Okay, so the first step we're going to do with this Pontiac Vibe is we're going to remove the negative battery cable. So for that we're going to use a 10mm ratchet. Loosen it, wiggle it off, and set it aside. You want to make sure you shove it somewhere where there's no metal contact in case it finds a ground there. So I'm just going to shove between the two plastic pieces and you should be fine. So we're going after the starter today. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect the hose from the radiator reservoir. Twist it to the side. Next step is there's two 10mm bolts holding on the fan assembly. So there's one this side and then one down here on this side below the upper radiator hose. So I'm going to take a 10mm, break it free. These bolts normally come off pretty easily once you break them free. It is going into plastic, that's why. There you go, got this one out. Going after this one. Got that one out. Okay guys, so after I remove the two 10mm bolts from the fan assembly, there's this one zip tie here holding on the plug, the electrical plug in for this fan assembly. I'm going to cut this zip tie, remove the zip tie. Then if you look down here, you can see the plug. I'm going to try and push down, see if you can get it off by hand. Sometimes you need a screwdriver to kind of get it to release. Let's see. Yeah, so I'll come back with a little screwdriver. Pop it with the screwdriver. It unplugs. There's one little plastic clip that holds the wire to the fan assembly. We're going to just pull that out. I'm going to set this wire aside. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to remove is the upper radiator hose. It's going to be in the way for when you pull out this plastic fan shroud. I'm going to take a pair of pliers. It's going to pinch the clamp, slide it up the hose, and I'm going to just wiggle the hose. You got to be mindful that when you pull this hose off, water will come out because this is the upper radiator hose. So I'm going to pull on the hose. Some of the coolant came out. So just going to let that drain for a little bit. I'm going to put the hose on the side out of my way. Okay, so the next step I'm going to do now, so we got the two 10mm bolts that mounts the fan assembly to the radiator off. We got the electrical harness that powers the electrical fan disconnected, and we got the upper radiator hose removed and set aside. So now I'm going to grab the fan assembly and just pull straight up on it. It's going to come right out. So this is the fan assembly. Okay guys, so now I'm going to remove the mounting bolts for this starter. So there's a bottom mounting bolt right at the bottom of the edge of the starter right here. As you can see, this is the bottom of the starter. So you look down below that, you'll see the bottom mounting bolt on the left hand side. And then on the right hand side, on the opposite side, the same side as the bell housing, is going to be another mounting bolt. But you need to follow that up to the top. Kind of got to go by feel because you can't really see it. So I'm going to take my extension, a 14mm socket. I'm going to tuck it in here. And just kind of go by feel. So when I feel the nut, I can feel the bolt in there. So I'm just going to reach down and get the socket on the bolt. Once I get the socket on the bolt, then I'm going to take my ratchet. I'm going to come down through here. Flexing that ratchet really helps with this tight spots. I'm going to click it onto the extension. And I'm going to crack this one free. I think it fell off of the nut, so I'm going to reposition it again. There you go, so I got it back on the nut. Just going to keep loosening it off. And once I feel I got it loose enough, I'm going to remove the ratchet. And I'm just going to reach in there with my hand and loosen it as much as I can using the extension and the socket. Then I'm going to take that out. I'm going to reach in here with my finger and then grab it. There we go, got one of the bolts out. Okay, so now I got the upper mounting bolt for this starter removed. I'm going to go after the lower bolt. For that, I'm going to use a deep socket, a 14mm. Flex head ratchet again. Then I got connected to the bottom bolt. And you see how the flex head ratchet really helps in this spot because it's a tight spot. So you have to leave the, I don't think you can get it with a regular ratchet unless it's a stubby. And so I got the ratchet kind of in an angle. I'm gonna pull up on that mounting bolt. Right there, got it broken free. I can just reach in there by hand. Remove that bolt the rest of the way. There we go, so I got the bottom bolt removed. When removing bolts, you want to just compare the two bolts, make sure they're the same size, or if they're different, and you know, one might go on one side, one might go on the other side. But in this case, the two starter mounting bolts are the same, so we know it doesn't matter which one goes where. Okay, the next step, I'm going to pull the starter out of the car. I'm going to jiggle. Got it removed. Okay, now that you got the starter pulled out, I like to pull it out so it's easier access to disconnect the power cable and the plug for the starter. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to press the plug connector, disconnect the plug from the starter. I'm going to pull up on this rubber. And this is the positive line for the starter. I'm going to take a 12mm socket. I'm going to crack that free. Got that nut off. I'm gonna pull the positive wire off the starter, and then there you go. Now the old starter is coming out. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna compare the new starter to the old starter. Make sure the mounting bolts are the same, the teeth inside for the spin the flywheel looks the same, and the electrical connectors look the same. Once we know they all match, then we can go ahead and install the new starter. Now I got the starter. It's going to be a reverse as the disassemble. So I'm going to remove the nut that holds down the power cable to the starter. The washer. I'm going to take the electrical terminal. I'm going to slide it down. I'm going to take the washer again, the nut, place it on top. I'm going to grab my ratchet. This one is going to be a 13mm instead of like the other one was a different size. So now I'm going to tighten this in here with the 13mm socket. Like I said, with electrical, you want to make sure everything's nice and snug. There you go. I'm going to put the rubber cap back on. Next I'm going to get the plug. I'm going to take the plug. I'm going to insert it into its position and push it until it clicks. And push it until it clicks. There you go. Got the plug in good. Okay, so now I got the starter all electrical connected. I'm going to take the starter and I'm going to put it back into its position. There we go. So I slid it in. Now I'm going to get the bolts. Okay, so now I got the two bolts from the starter. I'm going to take the lower one. Slide it through its hole. get it started by hand and put it in as far as I can, just using my hand. There we go. Okay, so now I got the bolt to go in the tough spot. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use a trick and I'll show you guys. I'm gonna take the socket that I'm gonna use. I'm gonna take a piece of paper, put it on a socket. I'm gonna take the bolt, I'm gonna shove it into the socket. I don't want it too far in, but right there. And what it does is now the paper holds the bolt from falling out. So now I can put it in and not worry about the bolt falling out. Okay, so now I'm gonna take the bolt and the extension. I'm gonna slide it in along here. And this is the tough one, it's kind of by feel. So once I feel like I got it right there, I'm gonna go down, and sometimes how jiggling the starter helps. So I can feel them, the threads is starting to thread in. There we go. Okay, so now I got the ratchet. I'm gonna click it into the extension. There you go. So now I'm gonna use the ratchet and just tighten it the rest of the way. There you go. I can feel the bolt getting tight. So I'm just gonna snug it up. There you go. Now I'm going to remove the ratchet and the socket assembly. And as you can see, when you pull it out, the paper falls off and just falls down to the ground and blows off of the engine when you're driving. And you get the socket and the bolts in there, and that's how you get a bolt into a tight spot where you can't get your hand in there. Okay, now I'm going to tighten up the bottom bolt for a starter. For that, I'm going to use a 14mm socket with the flex hit ratchet again. I'm going to get it on the bolt. And with the ratchet in an angle, I'm going to start the tightening. And there we go, I can feel the nut starting to get tight. So now I'm going to do a final tightening on it. There we go, got it nice and snugged up. I take the socket out. So now we got all the electrical from the starter connected. We got the starter all mounted in really nicely. Okay, so now we got the fan shroud. We're gonna reinstall that. So all you're gonna do is you're gonna take the fan shroud and slide it down into position. There's a little clip on the bottom that this sits right into. I'm gonna make sure it slides right into that position. Okay, so now you're sliding the radiator down, trying to get it into its position. Sometimes this can be a little tricky. There you go. There you go. So the radiator just slips right into its position. The next step is I'm gonna connect the coolant reservoir line back to the radiator. Okay, so now we got the cooling fan assembly mounted back in the car. We're gonna take the two 10mm bolts and start it by hand, mounting it back to the radiator. Do the same thing on this side. Gonna get the 10mm ratchet. There it is. So I'm gonna get the 10mm ratchet. Go and snug it up. Just be mindful, remember you're working with plastic here, you don't want to over tighten it and crack it. Same thing on this side. There you go. Okay, so now I'm gonna take my wire harness that connects to the cooling fan, and I'm just gonna clip it back on. I'm gonna take the plastic clip that holds it to the fan shroud, reattach it back. Okay, so now we're gonna take the upper radiator hose. I'm gonna reattach it back to the radiator. I'm gonna wiggle it on. Once we got it wiggled on, we're gonna take our pair of pliers. I'm gonna squeeze the clamp with our pliers, slide it down the upper radiator hose, and attach it back to its mount. Give it a nice tug, make sure it's mounted really firmly, and that's good. Okay, so now we're gonna reconnect the negative battery cable. For that, we're gonna just slide it onto the terminal. Gonna get our 10mm ratchet. Just tighten it up. Because it's electrical, I'm gonna make sure it's very firm. There we go, so got it nice and snug. So now I'm gonna go and top off all the fluids and give it a shot and see how it starts. Okay, so now we got the new starter installed. You can see it down there. We got everything all back assembled. We got the battery all reconnected. We checked the fluid levels, make sure all the fluids is all topped off, because you know we did disconnect the radiator hose, so we're gonna make sure that the coolant level is at a proper level. And now we're just gonna start it up and give it a test. Yeah, so there we go, guys. It cranked up really nicely, didn't drag or anything. So yeah, this job is good, man. So I'm gonna close this hood up and get this car back to the customer. So hope this all helped you guys out, and hope you guys like it, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you guys on the next one. Aloha.